Hey team, welcome to episode 9 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path of practice ownership. So up to this point, we focused primarily on the buyers and the buying side of this equation. But in this episode, we're going to switch gears and address the seller. Primarily, we're asking, are you ready? Are you ready for an outright sale? Are you ready to walk away? We've said it time and time again. A practice transition is such an emotional process. It's a business transaction, but there's an emotional side of it. And selling at the right time for you is so important in a successful transition. Now, if you're a buyer and you're listening, don't tune out quite yet. Understanding the flip side of the coin is, I think, one of the most important pieces and provides so much clarity to the transition process. Before we get started, say hello, Mr. Loretto.
Hello, people. Hello, peeps. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay today. I'm excited to be talking about the other side of what we do.
Yeah, me too. Can I just share some personal?
Of course.
So the 16-year-old daughter got her driver's license yesterday, so that means that dad is no more chauffeuring of the 16-year-old girl who's in 3 sports and this and that, has got a busier social life than dad. So it is a happy day for both child and for father.
So not an emotional transition for you. Is that what you're saying?
I'm emotionally scared, she's going to hurt herself or hurt someone else, but other than that, I'm a very happy camper.
But you don't have to be in the car now, so it's
yes,
okay.
Yeah. What's happening in the Chris world?
Oh, not much. It's life as we know it. Keep going. I really don't have anything important to say today. Okay. Is that bad? I feel very boring. Sometimes when someone's like, hey, what's going on? Or what's your hobby? And I'm like, yeah, work, and children, and husband. I'm looking forward to that independence of where your kids are when they can take care of themselves.
I'm a little ahead of you, girl. I'll let you know. I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. Well, we are going to talk about sellers today, as we said, and there are 2 areas that we are going to focus on today about, kind of asking, are you ready, sellers? And that is the you of, are you the seller ready personally? Mm-hmm. And then is your practice ready?
Right.
Okay. And so we'll dive into the you first. The first question we always ask is not about the practice. Mm-hmm. It is, hey, seller, what does your financial plan look? What do your financial goals look like? Right? Because that, unfortunately, money drives everything, right?
Yes.
What is your advice to a seller if they are looking to transition and they're kind of starting to just explore the process?
Yeah, I love our business because they just open up and we just can ask these types of questions, what collections and overhead and what type of liquid assets they have, and they really just download their entire lives. Let me give you an example of somebody who is ready. So when we ask them about their financial plan, I want to be able to hear some answers that I feel comfortable with, that if we do sell their life's work and essentially the business that's sending them and their spouse a check for potentially the rest of their life, it just makes sense that we're going to sell basically the goose that lays the golden eggs. And so let me give you an example. So I'm talking to a seller and like, Charles, I'm fine. I promise you, I'm financially set. And they just downloaded this. Look, I've got a couple million saved. I'm anticipating, I'm realistic. This is a million one practice. I know that I'll probably get around $800,000 after tax. I'm going to get, maybe $600,000. My plan is to lease, the building, and I think that I'd have rental income from that entity. I've got a couple of rental properties. All that's paid for. I'll at least have $7,500 there with my Social Security income at the age of this, and is another $2,500. And we're out. Kids are out of the house. We've got all the stuff paid, Charles. So I need you to know that my spouse and I, we're only living on $11-12 grand a month, and all these entities, it's plenty. It's just icing on the cake that this wholesaler practice is coming in. Check.
Right.
Like I'm like, good. We are good. Yep. But and we're having those conversations about, well, I really need to make $100,000. I really need to make $200,000. We want to work 4 days back. In the practice, those are usually signs to me. If they're not willing to open up to me, and we're going to take them down this road from a seller consulting standpoint, I get a little nervous.
Yep.
What I always say is there's 3 parties to every equation in this example on the transition. So there's the seller, and they're selling something. It's $1 million practice, and maybe it makes $400,000 a year. And then the buyer is going to look at this equation, and they're going to say, this is a great opportunity. This, I can do the work. I'm going to make $400,000 after debt service. When I pay the bank, I'm going to net $300,000. This is amazing. That's the second party. The third party is the bank. So the bank is going to look at the exact same thing that what we do when we represent our buyers throughout the year. We know what the bank's going to look at. And I think that for you, seller, it's important for you to understand also, what's the bank going to look at? And so if you're asking to work back in the practice and you want to be there 2-3 days a week, and they're going to look at your production provider numbers and see that you're normally a $4,000 guy or gal, there's not enough cash for this buyer. Yeah. And that's why that bank is going to say, we like you, buyer, but we don't like you, seller, because this business is not big enough. That may hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's not the buyer. That, in this case, the third party is the bank. So I think it's very important that you understand what that role is for the bank. They're just not going to hand away $700,000-$800,000 for something that doesn't make financial sense to them.
Absolutely. It's very important to clarify if you need to work back in the practice versus wanting to work back in the practice. And we'll talk about wanting to work back in the practice in a little bit. But if we talk to a seller and they say, I need to make $400,000, then you just need to keep owning the practice, because that's how you're going to be able to make that. We want our sellers to be involved in the transition and help the buyer and be there to help them transition, but we don't need them to need the financial money, because once you sell, you've sold and you are working back for that buyer, and so there you don't have that guaranteed ownership cash flow anymore. So you cannot require that the buyer pay you $300,000 of the ownership cash flows. You have to think on there. They're going to have debt. How are they going to live now? They're giving you the $1 million or whatever the value is.
Can I share something?
To be an owner, yeah.
So I had this conversation the other night, and this is a very emotional seller. I mean, very emotional. And we were dealing with the business. She got full asking price, and then we've got full lease rate. She is completely financially set, so check. But she just really wants to work back in the practice. And in this case, she was a specialist. And, she was going to work back, and the going rate for this particular specialty is anywhere between $1,200 to $1,500 a day. But just wasn't enough work. And so what I got her to agree to, and the buyer to agree to, she worked for $500 a day. Right?
She just wanted to.
Because she wanted to work. She just wanted to be involved in the business. And so I think as seller consultings and buyer consultant agent, we got to be able to remove that emotion and say, look, if it's just this, you want to be there, stop looking at the number anymore. We got more than what we wanted for the practice. We've got an outstanding lease for 10 years. We are set. Yep. So if you want to be involved, then be able to pull that emotion away and be able to work back for a lesser. Why? Because it worked for the buyer and for the bank.
Absolutely. So before we go too far down the emotional road, because I know we both have a lot of examples there, financially, again, going back to a seller who financially doesn't or does need to work. Three parties, buyer, seller, lender. Another thing we see is a lender maybe requiring the seller to work back. So maybe they are financially set, but a bank says, hey, because of the production and because of the size of your practice of what you built, you have to work back.
Yes.
And so maybe they don't want to, but the bank and the buyer and the practice kind of requires them. So an example kind of that you've seen there.
Yeah, so let's play with the numbers. So in general dentistry, that's $1.5 million practice. It does $1.2 million doctor. Remember the general rule, as a general dentist, about 75% of the overall collections of the business is going to be doctor. Approximately 25% is going to be hygiene. So in this example, it does $1.2 million or $100,000 a month in doctor production / collections. And if you, the buyer, or if you, the seller, and your buyer has only been able to contribute or be able to, from an adult restorative, only doing $60,000 of collections that's been verified by the bank. I mean, you got to understand, these banks, they're not just going to look at, you got 2 years out, 3 years out. Oh, you did an AGD GPR program. Oh, you've been here, associate. Oh, you came from the military. They want verified production. So they're not only just looking at the W-2 wages that person has been making, but they also want to see what production. So if they've only been able to verify they're doing $60,000, guess how much they're going to ask senior doctor to stay back and work. That one, they want a full year, and guess what? They want to basically budget for $40,000 of doctor production. Mm-hmm. So it's a math game to them, like a little puzzle of, okay, you're doing this, so we need you, sellers, I got to put you in here. Hey, seller, I'm sorry, but we don't need you. You got to know that going in. Yeah. And so we talk about, are you ready? If you really want to be involved, maybe the game plan is grow the practice, grow it so big to where you have essentially guaranteed your position there in that practice because you know that young buyer is not going to be able to do that.
Well, and be proactive about that. Also, don't get yourself financially set and mentally ready to walk away yesterday and then go to find someone and be upset now that you have to work. So if you've grown a big practice, kind of expect that and say, hey, I'm going to maybe sell a year before I'm emotionally ready to walk away because I know I'm going to have to work back. And the last thing you want to do is have to work back when you're ready to be done yesterday, right? I mean, that mentally puts you in a bad place. So obviously the price is a big piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
And so what we want to remind people of, though, is that lump sum of money you're going to get for the sale and an outright sale is one piece of that puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
If you work back, you're going to get compensation there. If you own the building, you're going to get money there for the lease.
Yes.
Try to think of the overall financial picture of what you're going to get, because that's probably going to be a big piece of that final financial plan, that last lump sum that's going to go into that retirement account that's going to help you meet those goals. Try to think about it as a big picture and not just the price that I need to negotiate to get to this certain dollar amount, because it can add a lot of stress to that negotiation process.
Yeah. We've got a seller that we're working with right now. It's a father-son relationship. And so the senior person in this case says, look, I need to make X dollars. It was $15,000, I think it's $15,000 a month. And so we did a seller finance on that one. So we came up with the dollar amount, $800,000. We divided that out over a 10-year period. And we had an interest rate, roughly, I think we did like 5% interest for the buyer / for the son. We've got lease set up for 10 years, and the senior doctor in this case is going to work back. And it more than compensates him for his financial plan, and it's a slam dunk for the buyer as well. So there's lots of different ways that we can do this. We can do a lump sum. We could do maybe a staggered sell where they give you a portion now, a portion later. You can carry the whole thing. So there's lots of different ways to construct the actual sale.
Yeah, absolutely. So emotionally, if you're financially set, the next big thing we want to make sure we focus on is, are you emotionally ready? And I think the first piece, if you're thinking about seller doing an outright sale or 100% sale, walk away, whatever you want to call it, the first thing I think that you have to know is, are you partnership material or not?
Right.
Okay. And we'll talk about partnerships in our next episode. But if you're partnership material, there are more options for you as far as slowly transitioning out, or maybe starting this process 10 or 15 years before you're ready, or growing a very large practice. But you know that about yourself.
Definitely.
Right? Like,
Definitely.
am I someone who wants to work side by side with someone and grow and kind of manage this together? Or am I just someone who would prefer to do things my way? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But knowing that is important as you contemplate, what does my transition out of this look like and into my next phase, whatever that is knowing, is it a partnership or not? Because the timing of what you're doing matters based upon that.
If you're the guy or gal that's constantly looking at everyone's shoulder and just nitpicking, and it's your way or the highway, and it's just like you're always right and they're always wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. You're probably a surgeon. You're probably just one of the top clinicians in your class, and you've taken all these extensive CE courses. If you understand that person that you're working with is not going to have the same skill set, but you got to allow them their time to be what you are, and you got to be patient with them. But if you're like that and you're looking for a partnership, you understand that they're just not going to be to your caliber and have that patience. If you don't have that patience, let's don't force this.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, partnerships are hard.
Yes.
They're a work marriage. And some people have a marriage and they don't want another marriage.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
Like, that's okay. It's not your cup of tea. You do you, and we'll do us. And that's part of it. But being honest with yourself and really thinking about that, and not trying to have a partnership if you're not partnership material.
Right. But we're not talking partnership today.
No.
No. Just sell.
Next time.
No. Okay.
Okay. So the next big thing, and this kind of goes hand in hand, but on a different mindset, is that, are you ready to work for someone else?
I know.
I mean, if you're not partnership material and you've worked by yourself for 30 years, you are going to hand the keys over to someone, likely someone who's younger, from a different generation, who does things differently than you and has different ideas, and you're going to be working back and kind of an employee of that person. And that is mentally, I think, one of the hardest things that we see sellers struggle with.
It is. They are ready and they want to do this. The financial plans, yes, and emotionally, yes, Charles, I really want to do this. and then they do it, and then now they're getting new direction from the buyer. It's within that first year, it's the best day of their career, and it's kind of like the worst day of their career. And it starts off with the worst part, which is there's just something sad that they're just missing because someone's telling them what to do for the first time. It's a struggle. We talk to our sellers after we close, and we'll sometimes get this.
Yeah.
And they're having a little bit of that struggle. And the vast majority, they ramp up to the, oh my God, this is just amazing. Yeah. So it definitely gets there. But, our most rewarding piece, I think, at least at this point in my career, is just being able to sort out as much of this as we can ahead of time to make sure they are emotionally, and financially ready, because we don't want you, seller, to go down this road until you're really prepared for it.
Yeah. And it may be that you say, hey, I can't imagine that I'm ever going to be ready to work for someone else.
Yeah.
And so I can do what I can to help them transition, and I'm going to do it, but it's going to be limited, and I don't want to work back for 1 year, 1 day a week, because that's just not how I'm wired.
Yeah.
And so again, being honest and preparing yourself for that, I think the sellers we work with who have prepared themselves for that and understand and are realistic about what they're doing and don't expect to still be there and being in charge, those are the most successful ones.
Yeah, and I'll give you a heads up, seller. Your day's coming where your body is going to tell you that you're ready. And that's also a very emotional part of this, is dentistry is a very, very demanding profession. So that, we just see this so much. It's like, you don't understand, I'm in this pain. I had this surgery. I got this. And now all of a sudden you're going to do an immediate sell. And that's stressful on the emotional side, and certainly stressful on the financial side. So prepare for this road.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I always kind of laugh when a seller is, most of the time during the initial process of finding a buyer, is surprised that the buyers aren't as prepared or don't seem as knowledgeable about ownership.
Right.
Of course they don't, right? Like, you've been doing it for 30 years. Of course they're not going to have the same thought process as you. They're going to make mistakes. They're not going to do things the same way. They're going to value something different than you value it from a technology or maybe staffing or whatever the change is.
Yeah.
That's just part of it, right? It's just a life cycle of ownership, and 30 years from now, they'll probably look back at their early selves and say, how in the world did I ever do that? I can't believe I didn't mess this up earlier.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. I found a quote when I was researching something the other day that said, there are two kinds of people. One kind says, look how great I was. When I retired, everything fell apart. And the other says, look what a great job I did when I retired. I left, and the person that took over just had so much success, and that makes me so happy, right? That's true. There are two kinds of people, and I think what we hope is that you emotionally prepare yourself, you financially prepare yourself, and that you're proud that when you sell your practice, it goes to someone who maybe doesn't do it the exact same way, but it grows and it thrives, and this thing you've created kind of continues.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, making sure you are ready is really important. The next thing that I want to talk about is the practice.
Okay.
Right? And this is kind of the more operational piece of it.
Can I say one more thing about that? I've always got more to add, don't I? God, stay on script, Charles. Stay on script. Dear seller, these young people, yes, they are millennials, and yes, they're different than you are, but they are drivers. It took them so much to get into dental school, and they do have significant debt. And I think you just need to give them some grace about this transition. And I know you may be nervous, or even if you're the buyer, you might be nervous this is not going to work out. It's the opposite. You're going to knock it out of the freaking park, buyer and seller. It may hurt you a little bit, but they're going to take your practice. Typically, if it's an $800,000 practice, once they buy it, it's going to be $1 million, $2 million, $5 million. We've seen this over and over and over again. These young people, they just come out and they just truly knock it out of the park. So give them grace. Just let them, understand that they are going to maybe make some changes in the practice, but it is going to be for the best interest of your team and for all those patients. So, so all this is negativity about millennials. They're doing great.
They're doing awesome.
Okay.
So the practice, we have to ready the practice. You've readied yourself. You're good. The practice, if you are preparing 1 to 2 years ahead of the time when you think, hey, I might be ready to retire in the next 1 to 5 years, there are things you can do for your practice operationally that can kind of help it set yourself up for success.
Right.
And so the space. So obviously you have a building, you either own it or you lease it. you've got your number of operatories. I think that there are things you can do to that space to make it more attractive.
Sure.
So room to grow. Is there room for expansion? Is there not room, right? If you have 3 chairs versus 6 chairs, this goes again to your point of there's 3 parties to a transaction, and if there's only 3 chairs, probably not room for you, right? And so is your lease negotiated, or is it current? Have you put a lot of time into doing that, or have you just let it kind of renew over and over again and your rates kind of creep up? What are your thoughts on the space and kind of prepping that?
Yeah, so, again, if it could be a very successful, I've seen this where it's like a 900,000 collection practice out of 3 chairs. That's really difficult to do, to get $300,000 out of a per operatory basis. General rule between 200, maybe 225, maybe 250 a chair is a general rule. But if you're getting some 900,000, just really efficient, great overhead, and you want to transition to practice, but you want to work back, there's just not chairs. And so that's going to be a problem. So ideally, if you're planning to stay on post closing, then obviously we need to have chairs. At least it needs to be space big enough that we could put the additional chairs in to essentially have a spot for you.
Right. But we want to be careful when we talk about updating and expanding and all of those things. We want to make sure that we're doing those things smartly, but we want to make sure we're doing these things that will add value to your practice or make it more marketable. But we want to caveat that if I go out and spend $250,000 to upgrade my practice to the best finish outs and maybe add a new operatory, and then I go to sell it the very next year, you seller are not going to get $250,000 extra on the value, right? It is not a dollar for dollar increase.
Right. Now, look, I promise you, salespeople are going to try to sell you on something different. They're going to try to sell you, hey, you need to invest all this new equipment, all this new technology. You got to prepare for, to bring this person in to make your practice more marketable. Let me just make it real simple. You've got $1 million practice, and it nets $450,000. It's in a major city or somewhat of an attractive area. It's not perfect updated equipment, not perfect updated technology. The value of that business, let's just say on the $1 million, is going to be $750,000. Because you went out and spent $250,000 and you made it look perfect and beautiful, does not mean that business is going to value $1 million. Remember, buyer, seller, bank. Guess what it's going to be worth? Roughly $750,000. Now, I'm not saying that we need to have 30-year-old chairs and shag carpet, because now all of a sudden the buyer is just not going to buy it at all. So you just need to be reasonable in that. I always say that when you're investing in technology, you're investing in any piece of equipment, you just need to look at the return on investment for that thing only. Is how do I get a return on investment for this decision? And then maybe an added benefit might be that it might add an incremental dollar amount to my practice, but not dollar for dollar for certain.
Yeah, so if you want to go do a fresh coat of paint, update some reception room furniture, maybe if you do have carpet, maybe it would make sense if you own the building to replace that. From an equipment or technology standpoint, if you don't have computers and you're not paperless or you're not digital, maybe investing in one of those pieces would increase the value incrementally and make it a more marketable practice for a buyer. The point is to be very careful about those and not expect the dollar for dollar return. And it also depends if you're saying, hey, I'm 60 and by 65, I'd like to retire, and so I want to start prepping over the next 5 years. Well, then by all means, make little improvements and investments over the 5 years, because you're likely going to, from a profitability standpoint, see the return on those. So that is the key, is that the profitability drives it, not necessarily I just went out and spent $100,000 yesterday and now my value should be $100,000 greater.
I take my favorite phone call is the guy or gal that is 60 that says, I want like a 3, 4, 5 year plan of how to transition my practice, either a partnership or to sell it outright. Or I had a call yesterday with a guy in Italy that was 2 years out and he's kind of wide open to where he wants to go. It's like, I love that, because you're able to kind of mold and shape them. And I gave him some tips on, things to do. And it was weird. He listened to the podcast in Italy. It's just like kind of.
I love it.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of fun, right?
Another thing is maintaining your equipment. So if you do have older equipment, just make sure it's maintained and that it's in working order. If you don't feel like, let's say you weren't planning and at the end of this year you'd like to retire retire and you want to find someone, go out and get all your equipment serviced. You can say, just like in a house, hey, I just had my HVAC serviced. You can tell it's in working order. Hey, I just had all these things. Someone came out, they repaired them, they're in good working order. Again, that's going to look good to a buyer. Next piece I want to talk about is more from a financial standpoint and goes along with that profitability, which is your overhead.
Yes.
Okay. Profitability drives the value and drives the marketability of a practice. I will pay more for a more profitable practice than I will a less profitable practice.
Yes.
So if you are 1, 2, 3 years out and you look at your overhead and there are certain cost categories that have crept up over time and you can make some effort to reduce those, you will see an increase in your value from every dollar is more profitable will likely result in some kind of proportionate increase in value. So that is really, really important.
So let me explain what's going on here, sellers. Is your financial plan is working. You've got your couple million saved. You've got rental income. You've got it all figured out. And now all of a sudden the number one thing you care about is time. Time with your family, just more time off, vacation, grandchildren, whatever it is. And so all of a sudden you slowly but slowly take your $1 million practice down to a 925. Slowly take it down to a 925, down to an 850. But because you care so much for your employees, you continue to let those employees stay there. They continue to get raises. Then all of a sudden your overhead has really crept up over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And now that practice is just not as marketable. And you can't just say, well, it used to be $1 million and I was working 190 days and now I'm working 150. So the new person would just need to, to work more and therefore I want more. It's not the way it works. Now, if you're okay with this from a financial, standpoint, like I'm okay with that, not a problem.
Right.
But the time to sell a stock is when the stock is rising, not on the decline. No one wants to invest in a stock that is declining. So you've got to really think that process through. And again, understand that there are different rules that banks have when they're looking at declining revenues. Certainly buyers are going to think less of it as well. So just keep that in mind. Nothing wrong with that as long as you're emotionally and financially ready that could take place.
Yeah, and you don't need to grow the practice. You just need to maintain
stability. Yep.
So that's the important thing there.
Yep.
So I think we've covered a couple of these other points, but another one I wanted to touch on that we see often, and it's oftentimes with older practices, is these shared space arrangements or shared equipment. And you and Doc, who's next door, has basically said, hey, we're going to buy a piano together and it's in the shared space and it's a handshake deal and you trust each other. Just remember that as a buyer coming in, 3 parties, buyer, seller, bank, buyer coming in doesn't have that same relationship with that other doc. They're going to want something more in writing. A bank is going to need some kind of security that equipment is the buyer who they're about to lend money to. So if you have those type of arrangements, document them, do the legwork in front so the buyer feels like they're coming into something that is already arranged, that they don't have to worry about, hey, I'm not going to have use of that piano once I sell or once I buy because I don't know that other doctor. Banks will look at that, and so it's just one more thing that if you're already doing it, let's just do it. Okay?
Christy, I just feel like we've only touched the tip of the iceberg here. I wish we had like a list, like a list for all the buyers that had like maybe, 90 points where they could just go and reference kind of this checklist. We need to do that.
You know what my superpower is?
What is it?
Making those things happen. It's already done.
Oh, it's already done. Okay. I just wish in a perfect world we had like this seller transition plan and a guide, and it just really walk the seller through this. I just wish we had that.
We do. And if you go to our website and click on resources.
Are you kidding? We have this? It's already up and going?
Seller transition guide. We also have one for buyers called the buyer checklist, where it has 90 things that you need to think about. And actually, I think both are good for the other to look at.
Absolutely.
Right? And there's a flip side of every coin. So if you're a buyer, of course, look at the buyer checklist, but then also read through that transition guide. If you're a seller, look at that transition guide because it's going to help you. But then also look at the buyer checklist, and you can kind of think of the other side of the coin on both those pieces.
The goal in these podcasts is really just to educate the party. So we really want to educate you, the buyer, so you know exactly what to think about prior to an acquisition. We'll talk partnerships next week. And then if you do come across this amazing selling doctor that you've got this connection with and they just don't have that plan for you, then we want to potentially work with the two of you. We'd work on a flat fee, would interview both of you separately to make sure that you're both kind of going down the same page, and then we would do a consulting arrangement to guide you through this. Same thing with you, seller. If you're listening, you've got this amazing candidate, but you're not sure about, the valuation, not sure about the timing, not sure, how much you should sell and when it's going to work. Is it an asset sale? Is it a stock sale? The building and him or her, working, back for you and how long it takes place. We want to guide you through that. Mm-hmm. And so, again, we work on a consulting relationship either with the buyer that represents a seller who's got a complete game plan, or we work with the buyer and seller that they don't have a game plan, and we can be that consulting kind of agent, for them. So
right, but
fun stuff.
Yeah, and the first step to me is I would love to have you as a client, and that's kind of what we do on a daily basis for our clients. What we want to do first, though, is just ask you, are you ready? And have these preliminary conversations. And we do that, again, for free. And I'm not sure that's a good business decision, but it's what we do because we like to do it. And that's what we want. We want you to, as a seller, to say, hey, I know this is in my future and I need to know if I'm ready, and use us as a resource. Use these resources we have on our website, this podcast, other things that we have available to say, I want to be as ready as I can to make it as successful as I can for myself and for a buyer. And that's what we're here for. So if that's you and you want us, reach out on our website. So I think we covered what I wanted to today.
Can I get a high five today?
High five.
That's what I'm talking about.
So that's all we got. Next time we're going to ask, are you ready for a partnership? And that's episode 10, so stay tuned for that if that's you. Again, check out our website for transition resources. Subscribe to Transition Talk on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or like us on Facebook or LinkedIn. It's the easiest way to know when we release new episodes. So have a great week.
Awesome.
And talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.